Hello there, fifth graders, and welcome to your fourth graders. I said it again, fourth graders, not fifth graders. Hello there, fourth graders, and welcome to your next math lesson. Open up your math notebooks, please, and at the top of the next available page, write the title of today's math lesson, which is Multiplication Properties and Division Rules. And you know what? Just write multiplication properties. We're not going to worry about the division rules part. We will go over that part, but it's too long of a title. So just write multiplication properties. Okay, what are multiplication properties? Well, remember, a property is a rule or law in mathematics that the numbers always follow. And today we're going to talk about four multiplication properties and 2 division rules. Okay, so let's take those properties one at a time. The first property we're going to go over today is called the commutative property. Now, you already learned about the commutative property of addition. Today we're going to learn about the commutative property of multiplication. And the good news is they work the exact same way. So remember, the commutative property of addition said that you can add numbers in different order and you still get the same sum. In other words, the answer to an addition problem doesn't change even when you change the order of the addends of the numbers that you're adding. Well, that's exactly the way it works in multiplication too. So the commutative property of multiplication says that when you're multiplying, the order of the factors does not change the product. In other words, you can change the order of the numbers or the factors that you're multiplying, and it doesn't change the product or the answer. So here's an example of that. 7 times 8 equals 56, and 8 times 7 equals 56. See, it doesn't matter if you put the 8 first or if you put the 7 first, they still equal 56. Now, that does not apply to division. 7 divided by 8 does not mean the same thing as 8 divided by 7. But when you're multiplying, it doesn't matter what number you put first. They're both factors. They have the same name. You can multiply them in any order. So here's another way of showing that same thing. 7 times 8 equals 8 times 7. So 7 times 8 equals 8 times 7. They both equal 56. So you can put these on either side of an equal sign and it works. It doesn't matter what order you multiply numbers in. The answer is still the same. That's the commutative property of multiplication. Next, the identity property of multiplication. Now, you probably remember the identity property of addition. This one's a little bit different when it switches over from addition to multiplication. Remember, the identity property of addition said anything you add to 0 equals itself, like 7 plus 0 equals 7. Well, the identity property of multiplication says when any number is multiplied by 1, the answer or the product is the original number that you started with. So a simpler way of saying that is anything times 1 equals itself. So here's an example of the identity property of multiplication. 9 times 1 equals 9. Pretty simple. Anything times 1 equals itself. You probably already knew that, but now you know that's called the identity property of multiplication. So that's what the identity property of multiplication is. Next is the associative property of multiplication. The associative property of multiplication works the exact same way as the associative property of addition. So remember, the associative property of addition said that when you're adding numbers, you can change the way those numbers are grouped in parentheses and it doesn't change the sum. Well, that's exactly what it means in multiplication too. The associative property of multiplication says you can change the way numbers are grouped when you're multiplying, and it doesn't change the product. So for example, 3 times 4 times 7 with the 3 and the 4 in parentheses equals the same thing as 3 times 4 times 7 with the 4 and the 7 in parentheses. So these both equal the same thing. The parentheses change the order in which you multiply because you always do what's in parentheses first, but it doesn't change the answer. See here, following the order of operations, we would do what's in parentheses first. We would do 3 times 4, and that's 12. Then we'd multiply that by 7, and we'd get 84. Here we'd do 4 times 7 and get 28, and then we'd multiply that times 3 and get 84. Either way, we get 84. So you can change how numbers are grouped in parentheses when you're multiplying. In other words, you can switch up which numbers are grouped in parentheses, but it doesn't change the product. It doesn't change the answer to the multiplication problem. Okay, we have one more property, and it's the zero property of multiplication. And this one, it's very simple. It just means when any number is multiplied by 0, the product is 0. So basically anything times 0 equals 0. So here's a simple example. 8 times 0 equals 0. That's the zero property of multiplication. That's a pretty simple one. Okay, so those are the 4 multiplication properties. Again, the commutative property says you can change the order of numbers when you're multiplying, and it doesn't change the product. Or when multiplying, the order of the factors does not change the product. So 7 times 8 equals the same thing as 8 times 7. Or 3 times 4 equals the same thing as 4 times 3. 6 times 9 equals the same thing as 9 times 6, and so on. And then the identity property of multiplication is any number times 1 equals itself. So 9 times 1 is 9, 12 times 1 is 12, 103 times 1 is 103, 516 times 1 is 516. Anything times 1 equals itself. Then the associative property of multiplication, 3 times 4 times 7 with the 3 and the 4 in parentheses equals the same thing as 3 times 4 times 7 with the 4 and the 7 in parentheses. So this property says when you're multiplying, you can change how the numbers are grouped in parentheses, and it does not change the product. And then the zero property of multiplication, anything times 0 equals 0. So 8 times 0 equals 0, 1 million times 0 equals 0, 64 times 0 equals 0, 7 times 0 equals 0, anything times 0 equals 0. Now, to think about this, it makes sense because you're saying 8 times 0, that means 8 0 times. Well, obviously if you have 8 0 times, you have 0. And that's the same thing here. 9 times 1 means 9 one time. And 9 one time would just be 9. Okay, so those are our 4 multiplication properties, and then we have 2 division rules. The first division rule is called zeros in division. Let me scoop this up a little bit so you can see that better. Zeros in division. And what that rule says is when you divide 0 by any number, the quotient is 0. So basically what this means is 0 times anything, or 0 divided by anything equals 0. So it doesn't matter what number you put right here, the answer is always 0. You could put a 7 there, a 6 there, a 12 there, 1,546 there, it doesn't matter. Let's just put a 9 there. 0 divided by any number equals 0. If the dividend is a 0, the quotient is a 0. It doesn't matter what the divisor is. Okay? So that's called that. Oh, and then there's another part of that rule. It is not possible to divide a number by 0. So let's say this was reversed, and instead of 0 divided by 9, it was 9 divided by 0. Well, that equals nothing. You can't do that. You can't divide a number by 0. Okay? And then there's ones This is the last division rule. It's called ones in division. And this is when you divide any number by 1, the quotient is always the dividend. So for instance, 8 divided by 1 equals 8. So when you divide 1 into a number, the answer is always the dividend, or the number that you started with. And the other one is when you divide a number by itself, the answer is always 1. So 8 divided by 8 equals 1. But if that was 10 divided by 10, the answer would be 1. If that was 11 divided by 11, the answer would be 1. Anytime the dividend and the divisor are the same number, the answer, or the quotient, is always 1. Okay, now for your independent work for today, I'm going to go ahead and turn this paper over, and I'm going to write some examples, and I want you to write these examples with me. But for your independent work, under each example, I want you to write what property or what division rule it is. So now, I'm not going to tell you what they are right now. Once we're finished writing all these and you finish this video, use the notes we just took to connect the right property or division rule with the correct example. So here's the first one. 3 times 2 equals 2 times 3. Under that, write which property or division rule that's an example of. The next one is 10 times 0 equals 0. Next one, 9 times 1 equals 9. Okay, next one, 16 times 3 times 8, with the 16 and the 3 in parentheses, equals the same thing as 16 times 3 times 8, with the 8 and the 3 in parentheses. Okay? And then 6 divided by 1 equals 6. Back this up a little bit so you can see better. And 0 divided by 3 equals 0. I want you to write under each of these which property or division rule it's an example of. When you're finished doing that independently using the notes we just took, go ahead and click on the video attached under this video so that you can see if you did it correctly. I will see you there. Mr. Dauber, signing off.